Representative Bob Good, Ryan Bomberger, thank you so much for sitting down today. Just want to ask you a few questions about your work, Ryan, and about what's going on in Congress. Representative Good, tonight, Joe Biden will address the nation in his State of the Union speech amid skyrocketing inflation, out-of-control crime in our inner cities, a border that is under siege, and a military-industrial complex that is hell-bent on sending American taxpayer dollars overseas. How do you, as the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, assess the state of our union, and why was it important for you to have Ryan here tonight?
Well, you've summed up some of the key issues, of course, and the president ought to be apologizing to the country, asking for forgiveness for the harm that he's caused on those issues and so many others. Everyone is worse off than they were 3 years ago. By no standard of measurement could you say that things are going well in the country under this president. And it's a direct reflection of his terrible policies. And so the Freedom Caucus, of course, stands to be the conservative conscience of the Republican House, to try to hold us accountable to what we said we would do when we asked the American people to trust us with the House majority, and also even to hold our own leadership accountable when we're off course and we're not living up to what we said we would do and who we said we would be. But I'm thrilled to have Ryan here with me tonight. Ryan Bomberger as a friend and ally in the most important cause, the cause of life, the number one most important personal issue to me. And we've got a president who'll be giving a speech tonight who embraces the culture of death that sadly and unfortunately the Democrat Party has become. As we know, they're so extreme on the issue, no restrictions up to the moment of birth, maybe even beyond, and you get to pay for it with your tax dollars. And he's even bringing as his guest tonight, someone who sued for the right to have an abortion within the limits that the state of Texas had on that. And so he wants to celebrate abortion, frankly, celebrate the taking of an innocent child's life. And so we learned about, my staff some time ago had learned about Ryan's story and about how he is a champion for life, and I'll let him tell his story, but it's a privilege to have him here with us tonight.
Yeah, that's a fantastic introduction, Ryan. But tell us a little bit more about your background, your organization, the Radiance Foundation, and just your mission.
Sure, and I'm honored to be here with Congressman Good, and honored to be a guest at the State of the Union tonight. It is tragic to me how much the Democratic Party celebrates abortion. I mean, there's the party of slavery, the party of Jim Crow, the party of voter suppression, and now the party of unlimited abortion. The party that still cannot get created equal right. And so what I do through our organization, the Radiance Foundation, is we highlight the truth that every human life has God-given purpose. And that's based partly on my story. I grew up in your typical American family of 15. I have 6 brothers and 6 sisters. 10 of us were adopted. I was the first adopted. Out of those 10, I was conceived and raped, but adopted in love. And that's why I'm even more passionate about those who are the most vulnerable, those who are the most dehumanized. When we talk about marginalized people, nobody's more marginalized than the unborn. Nobody's more exploited than mothers in America by a multi-billion-dollar abortion industry. So I will keep fighting for the marginalized and for the exploited. And so that's what we do through the Radiance Foundation. And hopefully maybe meet some people tonight, be able to share a little bit of my story, one-on-one. But a lot of what I do throughout the year is really just illuminate that these exceptions cases, I'm the 1% that's used 100% of the time to justify abortion. And I'm trying to shatter that whole myth that abortion is the answer to the violence of rape, or that it's the answer to any difficult circumstance.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and a message I think, our nation obviously needs to hear. I noticed that your organization's website specifically talks about how abortion disproportionately impacts the Black community. Can you talk a little bit about that? In this age of DEI and critical race theory that we're all living under, how can we make sure that we are standing up against the radical left's racism and just truly supporting Americans of all creeds and colors, unborn or born?
Right. Well, as a factivist, if you just look at the numbers, Planned Parenthood kills more Black lives in 2 weeks than the KKK killed in a century. And for people to say, oh, well, that's extreme. Well, first of all, it was extreme for Planned Parenthood to actually target the Black community with what was called the Negro Project. And that at that time was about birth control to reduce the birth rates in poor Black communities. Well, that targeting has never ended, except birth control then became abortion on demand. And so, yes, when you have New York City, which is the home of Planned Parenthood, for years and years, more Black babies have been aborted than born alive. So when I hear this whole mantra of Black Lives Matter, I want to ask the question, well, which ones? Because obviously not the unborn Black lives, not Black women who are highly targeted by the abortion industry. So a lot of what we have done too is we launched campaigns. In fact, the first billboard campaign we launched was about abortion's hugely disproportionate impact in the Black community. It was called TooManyAborted.com. I was called a racist. I was called out by the ACLU. They denounced us. In fact, even the NAACP denounced us and sued us, and that was an insane, surreal 2 years in federal court being sued by the NAACP, hello, brown guy, being sued by them for calling them out in their radical pro-abortion position. But we're about highlighting the impact of abortion, society-wide. But when people want to talk about systemic racism, nothing's more systemic than a taxpayer-funded entity that disproportionately kills Black lives, and that's Planned Parenthood.
Right, and the taxpayer-funded point I think is so important. Congressman Good, obviously a lot of these CRT and DEI initiatives that we're seeing, in schools, in abortion facilities, in our military, in government agencies, it's funded by American taxpayers.
That's right.
What can Congress do to put a stop to this woke spending?
Well, you actually touched on it. What we can do is stop funding it, and that's one of the things that's so disappointing about the big spending bill that got passed yesterday, despite my objections and 82 other conservatives in the House, because we did almost nothing to dismantle the harmful policies. In addition to borrowing and spending our kids and our grandkids into bankruptcy, your generation, and running a $200 billion deficit with $35 trillion in national debt. But what we're spending on, this climate extremism, this LGBTQ extremism, the transgender surgeries, funding abortion, quite frankly, in addition to racist things like DEI and CRT and so forth, we did almost, and for that matter, like you said, funding Planned Parenthood, we did almost nothing in terms of fighting for true policy changes with how the dollars are spent, beyond the fact that we're borrowing, but how the dollars are spent. And quite simply, it comes down to we are, as a conference with our leadership right now, we are unwilling to really have a fight and to say no to the Senate and the White House and to say, you know what, we're not going to fund the border invasion. We're not going to fund a Department of Injustice that's weaponized against its citizens, going after pro-life protesters, going after parents at school board meetings, going after Christians practicing their faith, or political opponents, or that suppresses information and free speech online. We're not going to fund these policies that are so harmful that we campaign against, so we can do it with the power of the purse if we would just have the courage and the resolve to do so.
Absolutely. And you mentioned how this is impacting the younger generations, especially this out of control spending. As a Gen Z American myself, I find, I'm inundated with radical left talking points, with CRT, with DEI, with pro-abortion messages, especially as a woman. Ryan, how can we kind of combat that and really reach out to the youth in this country who are increasingly voting Democrat?
Well, we have to go back to who we are as human beings. And we hear a lot of talk about equality, but when does that start and why would it end? And so when we want to elevate people, understanding that the strength of our nation is actually exhibited by the way that we elevate the weak. And so for young people, sometimes it's a fusion of the evidence and the emotional, the evidential and the emotional. Part of what, when I speak in college campuses, I share my story, and then I share, these statistics surrounding abortion, and even with these things with CRT and DEI, and it's amazing how little college students actually know. Unfortunately, a lot of times they're being taught to fear instead of to think, but it's amazing what happens when they actually some of those layers are peeled back. There are times when after I'm done speaking, I get college students say, well, I hated you when you came in, but I've never heard that perspective before. I mean, heaven forbid, someone who's brown, who actually is anti-racism, who is anti-DEI and CRT, because the whole point of it is that, or at least we went through this period with Martin Luther King Jr., who said that it's not the color of your skin, it's the content of your character, and it's complete reversal. Right. And so I think certain things will resonate with people when they actually get to hear some basic truths. It moves people.
Absolutely. And Congressman Good, you touched on earlier, Jill and Joe Biden invited a woman from Texas to be their guest for the State of the Union. She is a woman who, fought for her right to get an abortion, crossed state lines to do so when she received a prenatal diagnosis at around 20 weeks. Ryan, from your experience working, to prolong the pro-life movement's reach and to just make sure that we're protecting life in this country, what can we do to reach out to women like this Texas woman and to make sure that they're supported and that they know they have options, right? So many women are given prenatal diagnoses and they're told that it's lethal. There's nothing they can do. What can we do to make sure that we're interjecting in those spaces?
Well, we have to stop fearing what they're cheering. The left is constantly celebrating abortion, and they don't want to talk about the options. They don't want to talk about the resources that are there. There are 3,000 pregnancy centers, 450 maternity homes, and they're not the only resources. When we fear talking about these situations and talking about the resources and help that are available, we just leave people hopeless. And in the case of Kate Cox, it's such a tragic situation where she felt like she had to end the life of her disabled child. Now, I grew up with 6 brothers, 6 sisters, 10 of us were adopted. A number of us have disabilities. And the thought that my life, my parents' life, that the world would be better off without someone who is, whatever the perceived or actual disability is, blows my mind. And so that's why I'm working toward a society where we see the weak and the vulnerable as worthy of protection from the moment of conception onward.
Absolutely. And what can we do in Congress to make sure that whether it's, legislation or pushing for things at the state level even, what can we do to just ensure that life is protected?
Well, there's a battle it's a many-pronged battle, if you will. It's trying to change hearts and minds through our churches, through our ministry, supporting crisis pregnancy centers, supporting women and helping them know that they have options. And that's what's so wonderful about these crisis pregnancy centers, because they come alongside women irrespective of the decision. And while they are going to try to counsel and help them realize they do have options and they do have support that's available to them, but they're going to love those women and support those women with the truth of God's word, but also with the truth about the facts of, again, the options that they have, whether it's for adoption or someone to come alongside them. But there's a legislative role too. And, as slavery was a stain on our country and was legal during the 18th and 19th century, so is abortion in the 20th and 21st centuries. And I would hope that one day we would look back with the same contempt and disdain for those who supported abortion like we do with those who supported slavery. And this is a moral issue. I don't like to call these things social issues. There's nothing social about life or these moral issues that are so important. But I call it the Great Departure. After the Dobbs decision, many of my friends all of a sudden didn't want to talk about the federal responsibility or the congressional opportunity there when the Supreme Court showed that courage in the face of the leaked Dobbs decision and the protests outside their home, no protection from Merrick Garland and others, and they showed courage to say, hey, the Constitution does not, in 1973 when they read into it a right that didn't exist, a right to an abortion, they overturned that courageously. And that's really unusual to overturn precedent that's 50 years old, but it was the only decision that ever cost 63 million lives, disproportionately, as Ryan said, those in the minority community by design, unfortunately and sadly. So we ought to, again, I'm life from conception. I think we need to battle, change hearts and minds, but we also need to be statesmen and to do what's right. And I think we ought to be fighting to restrict abortion on the federal level, which isn't very popular in my party right now, along with doing it on the state level.
Absolutely. Well, as a pro-life voter, I'm so thankful, for what you're doing in Congress and you at, the grassroots activist level. It was fantastic to sit down with you both. Thank you.
Great to be
so
with you.
much.
Thank you.